Hey everyone, so I'm finally back, getting back into this book. I know it's been a while, so I apologize, but I'm trying to soak in this last bit of summer, go camping with my kids, and just life, life happens. But thank you for being back with me. I'm kind of feeling like really floaty right now because I just finished the live that the double Jasons. I love it. I think it was the real witness Chrissy that I saw her call them the double J's, and I'm like, yeah, I love that. They just did this phenomenal show that was, again, I just feel like my heart is just continually like being blown open by so many amazing people I'm coming into contact with, and it's just like, wow. I might even listen to it again before bed because there was so much amazing like wisdom and knowledge that those two are sharing, so much that I resonate with, so many things that I've been talking about, that's been coming into my mind and my forefront, and they're speaking it too, and it just confirmation, right? And it's so positive to see that, and to see men opening up and telling their story and being a witness and just being like open and raw, and it's so beautiful, like to be able to witness people do this, and to do it on a big scale, right? Like it's not easy to open up, and then when you've got like the amount of people that are watching them and viewing their videos, and knowing that you are like being fully open and raw, and it's just such a beautiful thing. So both of you, both Jasons, I'm so honored. So thank you so much to be a part of this soul tribe, this soul family. I'm just so grateful. Jay Rocco, you're another one that's right in there with them. But so for this book, I am still finishing chapter 2 because, like I said, chapter 2 was a super long chapter. So just to remind you, I am reading from the 10th edition. So if you are following along with me, I don't know if the different editions are slightly different or not. And again, just to remember, just to please be patient with me. Reading out loud is totally taking me out of my comfort zone. It's not something that I enjoy to do at all, but I just felt really called to share this story with you as I was reading it again. The third time. This is the third time that I'm reading this one before I hand it over to my oldest daughter. So I hope you're enjoying it. Again, there's names and places in here that I struggle with. Just bear with me. Again, you are going to hear things in here because of the times it was written in. So there is, you've got polygamy, you've got pedophilia, basically, right? You've got these men marrying really young women. Just a lot of those types of things just to take into consideration. So the red tent, we are on chapter 2, page 42 in the 10th edition. As Jacob walked away from his first meeting with his son, his happiness seemed to evaporate. His head sank to his chest as he contemplated what had to be done next. According to the custom of his family, the boy had to be circumcised, and there was no one to do it but him. Jacob would not let Levian touch the baby, much less take a knife to him. He knew of no other men in the village or nearby hills who knew how, much less why, he would want to do this to his firstborn son. It would have to be him. Jacob had seen his father cut the foreskins from his bondsman's baby boys, and he had not looked away or even winced when it was done. But he had never done this himself, nor had he realized, had he watched carefully enough, how his father had dressed the wound, and of course he had never cared so much for any baby in his life. It had to be done, though, and he began the preparations, which Zilpah watched and reported to Leah, who was sick at the prospect of having her baby, her prize, put on the altar of the Bama and mutilated. For that's what she considered it. Me too. The flap of the skin on the penis meant nothing to her. Indeed, now that she had seen the look of an uncircumcised man, she preferred the look of Jacob's sex, exposed, clean, unadulterous, even to the tiny shroud her son wore on his member, which was the source of many silly and crude jokes in the red tent. Once Leah threatened to take a bit of charred wood and draw a face upon Reuben's sex, so that when Jacob retracted the foreskin, he would drop his knife in wonder. The woman rolled around on the mats, holding their sides, laughing about their tender equipment, the tender equipment that men carried between their legs. But after a few days, the joking stopped, and Leah cried so long and so hard over her boy at her breast that the dark curls on his head were salted with tears. Still, she did not object to the custom of her husband's father. Oh, sorry, I just had to stop there because I have a son, and I can't imagine. I just can't. No judgment on anybody that, has done this, but I'm really feeling Leah here in this part of the story. Now that I read this, having had a son, it's wow. Jacob had survived this, she told her sisters again and again, mostly to reassure herself. Isaac had been circumcised, and Abram before him. Nevertheless, the thought of her baby in pain and in danger made the new mother tremble, and the realization that Jacob had no experience at the task put her in a frenzy of worry. Zilpah watched and saw that Jacob was not at ease about the ritual either. Every night he sat on the baham with his knife and sharpened it on the altar. From sunset till moonrise, 3 nights running, until the edge was perfect, he honed and polished the blade until it could cut a hair from his head with the slightest motion of his wrist. He asked Ada to make small bandages woven of new wool taken from the first shearing of the firstborn lamb on the season. He sent word to Leah inquiring whether she had any of the midwives' ingredients to aid the healing. On the 7th night after Reuben's birth, Jacob sat up silently watching the sky until sunrise. He poured levitations and sang to the God of the fathers. He poured levitations over the Asher too and opened his hands before her. Zilpah watched all of this and afterwards stopped referring to Jacob as the new man. She began to call him by his name. At dawn on the 8th day after his son's birth, Jacob killed a kid and burned it on the altar. He washed his hands, rubbing them red with straw, as though he had handled a corpse. And then he walked to the red tent and asked the woman gave him Reuben, the son of Leah. He called for Laban to follow him, and the 2 men walked alone to the Bamha, where Jacob undressed the baby whose eyes were open and placed him on the altar. Jacob sighed a loud, long sigh as he stripped the baby. Then he signaled Laban to grab the baby's legs. At this, Reuben began to wail. We're having a thunderstorm. Did you guys just see that? Like lightning storm. That was crazy. Oh, sorry. That really... I was not expecting that. That just I wonder if you guys can hear that. That was so loud. Okay, I hope I don't lose power in the middle of this. Where was I now? Jacob sighed a loud, long sigh as he stripped the baby, and then he signaled Laban to grab the baby's legs. At this, Reuben began to wail. Jacob took the knife in his hands and knotted his brow. There were tears in his eyes, said Zilpah. He took the baby's sex in his hands and pulled the skin up tightly, holding it between the 2 long fingers of his left hand. With his right hand he cut with a quick, sure stroke, as though it was an old custom of his, as though he knew what he was doing, she said. Reuben howled, and Jacob dropped the knife. Oh. Quickly he bound the wound with Ada's bandage and swaddled the baby, badly the way men do. He carried his son back to the woman, whispering into Reuben's perfect ear words that no one else could hear. The red tent, which had been quiet during the baby's absence, now burst into activity. Leah dressed the wound with the cumin oil that Ina had left from her own birth wounds. Ida swaddled Reuben properly and gave him back to his mother, where he took her breast with relief and then slept. The baby healed quickly, as did Leah during her first month as new mother inside the shelter of the red tent. She was pampered by her sisters, who barely let her feet touch the earth. Jacob came by every day, carrying freshly dressed birds for her meals. Though the hairy wall of the tent, they relayed the news of their days with a tenderness that warmed those who overheard them. Ada beamed the whole month and saw her daughter step out of the red tent, restored and rested. She delighted in her grandson's first yawns and sneezes, and was the first to notice Reuben's lift his head. Ada held the baby whenever Leah would put him down, and the joy of him lifted years from her face and the pain from her bones. But the illness that had wasted her strength could not be cured by even the greatest joy, and one morning she did not rise from her blanket. Ada was the only mother of any of the sisters. Ada was the only mother any of the sisters had known, and put ashes in their hair and honored her. Leah washed Ada's face and hands. Zilpha combed her hair smoothly. Rachel dressed her in the finest tunic they owned, and Bilhah placed Ada's few rings and bangles on the withered wrists, necks, and fingers. Together they crossed her arms and bent her knees so that she looked like a sleeping child. They whispered wishes in her ears so she could carry them to the other side of the light, where the spirits of her ancestors would greet her soul, which could now rest in the dust of the earth and suffer no more. They wrapped her in a shroud of unbleached wool lined with sweet-smelling herbs, and buried her amid the roots of a big tree where the woman often gathered to watch the moon rise. Jacob dug the grave while Laban stood and watched, ashes on his head to honor his first wife. With Ada, Laban buried his youth, his strength, and perhaps some forgotten better self. He threw the first handful of dirt, then turned and walked away before the four sisters finished tucking her in with earth, flowers, and loud lamentations. 2 months after Ada died, Bilhah entered the red tent. With Ada gone and no other elder to take the part, Leah, nursing her son, became the welcoming mother. She greeted the acolyte and taught how to manage the flow of blood, how to rejoice in the dark of the moon, how to join her body's cycle with the repetition of life. The wheel had turned, and even though Laban remained title as head of the clan, Jacob's time to perish had begun. My mothers, too, began numbering their days with their wisdom of women. They followed many good years. The rains came in seasons, and the well water was sweet and abundant. The land was spared pestilence, and there were peace among the surrounding tribes. The herds prospered so that Jacob could no longer manage the work alone, and he contracted with Shibut, the third son of the local shepherd, as a 7-year bondsman, and then he hired Nomer, who brought a wife, Zipatu. Sorry, guys. And there was a new face in the red tent. The family's good fortune and increasing wealth were not entirely the result of Jacob's skill, nor could it all be attributed to the will of the gods. My mother's labor accounted for much of it. While sheep and goats are a sign of wealth, their full value is realized in the Hansbury of women. Leah's cheese never soured, and when the rust attacked wheat or millet, she saw to it that the afflicted stems were picked clean to protect the rest of the crop. Zilpah and Bilhah wove the wool of Jacob's growing flock into patterns of black, white, and saffron that lured traders and brought new wealth. This was the time of great fertility among the women. Many babies were born, most survive. Leah wore the mantle of the great mother, seemingly always pregnant or nursing. 2 years after Reuben's birth, she bore a second son, Simon. Levi was born only 18 months later. Leah miscarried after that, but within another year, her sorrow was forgotten in the joy of her fourth son, Judah. Those brothers, so close in age, were a tribe unto themselves. Reuben, always the heaviest and tallest, was gentle with the younger ones. Simon was a demon, handsome and smug, demanding and rude, but forgiven everything for his dimples. Levi was a meek mouse and Simon's slave. Judah was a quiet boy, affectionate toward everyone. He was much fairer than his brothers, and Jacob told Leah that he resembled his own brother Esau. While Leah was carrying Simon, Reuben's Rutai showed a big belly, too, and bore a boy, Kemuel, who was followed a year later by Beor. The old man doted on his slope borrowed sons who played rough hand and tumbled with Leah's boys at first, but then invented a secret language, what locked them into a narrow world of their own making. Laban thought this demonstrated his son's superiority, but the rest of the family saw it as proof of their stunted nature and limited prospects. The happy noise of children surrounded them, but the blessings of generations was not equally distributed. Rachel miscarried again and again. After the bloody flood washed away her hopes a fourth time, she sickened with a fever that drove her out of her mind for 3 days and nights. This frightened her sisters so badly, they insisted she stop trying to conceive, and persuaded her to drink the infusion of fennel seed that seals the womb, at least until she had regained weight and strength. Rachel, exhausted, agreed. But she could not rest long amid the clamor of her sister's sons. Although she no longer hated Leah with the full force of the past, Rachel could not smile at her sister while her own body remained fruitless. She was often away from the family's tents, seeking the counsel of Ina, who had seemingly endless list of concoctions and strategies to open her womb. Rachel tried every remedy, every potion, every rumored cure. She wore only red and yellow, the colors of life's blood and the talisman of healthy menstruation. She slept with her belly against trees said to be sacred to local goddesses. Whenever she saw running water, she lay down in it, hoping for life of the river to inspire life within her. She swallowed a tincture made of bee pollen until her tongue was coated yellow, and she peed a saffron river. She dined upon snakes, the animals that give birth to itself year after year. I struggled having kids when I was married. My first child, we struggled for 3 years before we went down the whole process of getting help. So I feel this. Of course, when anyone, adult or child, found a mandrake, the root that looked so much like an aroused husband's, it would be brought to Rachel and handed over with a wink and a prayer. Reuben once found an especially large one and brought it to his auntie with the pride of a lion hunter. But mandrakes did nothing for Rachel's room. During her quest for a child of her own, Rachel assisted Ina and became her apprentice. She learned what to do when the baby presented itself feet first, and what to do when the baby came too fast and the mother's flesh tore and festered. She learned how to keep a stillborn's mother from giving up her spirit in despair, and how, when a mother died, to cut open the womb and save the child within. Rachel brought her sisters stories that made them weep and sigh and wonder, of a mother who died and a father who sold the infant before her body was cold, of a man who swooned at the death of a beloved wife, of a woman who cried blood for her dead child. She told of potions that worked miracles upon one woman and seemed to kill another, of an armless monster left out to die in the night air, of blood that carried off and blood that healed. There were triumph stories too, of healthy twins, of a baby born blue, the cord wrapped tight around its neck, brought to life by Ina, who sucked the death from the little one's nostrils with a river reed. Sometimes Rachel made her sisters laugh with imitations of women who roared like lions, and others who held the breath and fainted rather than make a peep. Rachel became their link to the larger world. Along with tales of life and death, Rachel brought back new herbs for seasoning, vegetables, recipes for unguent that healed wounds, and ever stranger remedies for the barrenness, all of which failed. Often Rachel returned bearing a bracelet, a bowl, a skein of wool, tokens of gratitude for her generosity, a childbed. The imprecious beauty became a tender-hearted healer in the service of mothers. She wept at every birth, the happy ones as well as the ones that ended with kneeling and whimpering. She wept with Rudy and even with Leah. When it came time for Zibitu to stand at the midwife's bricks, Rachel, alone without Ina, led her through the ordeal, tied off the cord, and flushed with pleasure when she held her first, the baby that conferred upon her the title of midwife. Leah cooked her a feast that night, and Zilpah poured out salts and wine before her in recognition of her new status as a servant of woman in the name of Anthar the healer. So beautiful. As time passed, more bondsmen came to live and work for Jacob, and with them came women who bore children and lost children. Zibitu gave birth to Nasi, but then lost her second child, a girl who came 2 months before her time. Atuni bore 2 girls who thrived, though she died of fever before her daughters knew their mother's face. Lamisi gave birth to a son, Zinrai, but her daughter was left out to die because she had the hair lip. In the red tent, we knew that death was the shadow of birth, the price women pay for the honor of giving life. Thus our shadow was measured. After Judah's birth, Leah grew tired. She who had always risen the earliest and retired last, who seemed most content when doing 2 things at once, stirring a pot while nursing, or grinding grain as she oversaw the spinning, began to stagger in the afternoon and see shadows where there were none. Ina advised her to leave off bearing for a while, and brought her fennel seed, and also showed her how to fashion a piecely out of beeswax. So Leah rested. She rejoiced in the sturdiness of her sons and stopped every day to caress them and play their game of smooth stones. She baked honeyed cake as she used to, and planned a new garden where herbs would attract more bees and nearby hives. She kept soundly at night and rose in peace every morning. Leah remembered her fallow years as time of great contentment. She held the fullness of every day in her hands, numbering the sweetness of children, the pleasure of work. She gave thanks for the fennel seed and the wisdom to use them. Her cake never tasted sweeter than it did that year, and she responded to Jacob's body with more ardor than she had ever felt for years. When she spoke of that time, Leah said, "The flavor of gratitude is like the nectar of the hive." After 2 years, she put away the fennel seed and peasery and conceived another son, whom she bore easily and named Zebulun, by which Leah meant exalt, because with his birth Leah exulted in her body's ability to heal and give life once more. She adored the new baby nearly as much as her firstborn. And when she handed her son over to Jacob for circumcision, she smiled into her husband's face, and he kissed her hands. So that is the end of chapter 2 finally. Yeah, like I said, it was a long chapter, so sorry that it took so many videos to get through it. Hopefully it won't take me so long to be able to find some time to get back and start chapter 3 with you guys. I don't know how long chapter 3 is. A lot of these chapters are quite long, so we'll just go with it however we can. I hope you guys are enjoying this. Like I talked about super quickly in the beginning of this video, I really think that you guys should go watch the double Jason's show tonight. So Jason from Arcana Shores Tarot and the other Jason, Soldier of Light, who also has his own YouTube channel. I highly recommend that you go watch that show. Yeah, Divine Masculines, opening up, being raw, and it's so beautiful. And yeah, I hope you guys are having an amazing night. I might go outside and check out this thunderstorm that we're having here, and we'll see you guys soon. Take care.